There's a quiet mistake happening in millions of relationships right now, and most people don't even notice it. Men aren't leaving because they don't care. They're disappearing because they're slowly being erased. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When a man feels misunderstood, he doesn't argue, he withdraws. And modern culture keeps pushing one dangerous lie, that men need to be reshaped, softened, or reprogrammed to love correctly. At first, it sounds harmless. Open up more. Talk like this. Feel the way I feel. But beneath those suggestions hides pressure. Pressure that quietly tells a man who you are isn't enough. And that's where the damage begins. Not with shouting, not with betrayal, but with slow, invisible identity loss. What happens inside a man when love starts feeling like a performance? Why does silence become his only defense? Because once respect fades, love can't breathe. And this is only the surface. Here's where the shift becomes invisible, but dangerous. It doesn't start with control. It starts with suggestions. Different clothes, different friends, different interests, all framed as help. The truth is, when a man feels improved instead of accepted, he slowly disconnects from himself, not because he's weak, but because he's adapting to survive. He tells himself this is what love requires, so he compromises, then adjusts, then silences parts of himself, until one day he looks successful on the outside and hollow on the inside. This is the paradox few people talk about. The traits women often try to correct, focus, independence, obsession with purpose, are the same traits that created attraction in the first place. When those are dismantled, the man doesn't become better, he becomes compliant. And compliance kills polarity. But the real danger isn't what she changes, it's what he stops defending. And that leads us to the next fracture, intimacy. Most people misunderstand male intimacy, and that misunderstanding quietly destroys bonds. For a man, intimacy isn't just physical, it's permission. Permission to drop the armor, permission to stop performing, permission to exist without being evaluated. The problem is, when intimacy becomes conditional, a man doesn't feel motivated, he feels managed. If closeness is offered as a reward, if affection must be earned, something sacred collapses. Here's what few women realize. When intimacy is withheld, a man doesn't hear, "I'm not in the mood." He hears, "You are not acceptable right now." That rejection doesn't spark communication. It sparks retreat. So he pulls back emotionally, not to punish, but to protect. And once intimacy feels unsafe, he builds walls no conversation can tear down. What replaces closeness then is silence. And silence has consequences. Silence doesn't always mean distance. Sometimes it's survival. Men don't process pain by talking it out. They process it by being present. Two men can sit side by side for hours, say almost nothing, and walk away restored. No emotional autopsy, no verbal deep dive. To the outside world, that looks cold, but internally it's regulation. When a man is overwhelmed, words feel like pressure, questions feel like interrogation, and forced vulnerability feels like danger. So he retreats not away from love, but toward balance. The mistake many partners make is trying to pull him out before he's ready. That doesn't create closeness. It triggers resistance. Because for a man, support isn't always "tell me everything." Sometimes it's "I'm here," no demands. And that quiet presence builds more trust than 1,000 conversations. But not everyone offers presence. Some seek something else entirely. And that's where empathy turns toxic. Not all attention is care. Some attention feeds on chaos. Dark psychology calls this emotional voyeurism, the hunger to witness, analyze and relive someone else's pain without carrying any of its weight. It sounds like concern. It looks like curiosity, but it consumes rather than supports. A man senses this instinctively. When his struggles become stories, when his vulnerability becomes information, trust evaporates. Because now his pain isn't safe, it's entertainment. That's why men shut down when pressed for details they're not ready to share. Not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to be emotionally mined. True empathy doesn't demand access. It offers shelter. And here's the line most people cross without noticing. When vulnerability is pulled instead of offered, it becomes invasion. Once a man feels exposed rather than understood, he builds stronger walls.
Higher.
Thicker. And behind those walls, something crucial disappears. Clarity. Because when safety dies, honesty follows. And that leads to the next conflict, communication itself. Here's where most relationships quietly unravel: misinterpretation. Men speak in straight lines. Facts, statements, needs. No hidden tunnels, but dark psychology. Shows what happens when simple words are treated like coded messages. I'm tired becomes suspicion. I need space becomes rejection. I'm fine becomes a lie that must be decoded. And tension is born where none existed. A man says he's busy. He means exactly that. Not emotional distance, not fading interest, just focus. But when every sentence is analyzed for subtext, home stops feeling safe. It becomes a courtroom. So he simplifies, speaks less, shares only what can't be misread. This isn't emotional laziness. It's self-preservation. Men don't communicate to hint. They communicate to solve. And when clarity is punished, silence feels smarter. But there's one thing even more essential than being understood: respect. If you ask a man what matters more, love or respect, most won't hesitate. Respect comes first. Here's why. Respect signals trust in his competence, judgment, and strength. Without it, affection feels hollow. Love without respect feels like supervision, like being cared for but not believed in. It shows up in small moments, correcting how he drives, second-guessing his decisions, hovering while he works. None of it sounds cruel, but to a man it sends one message: I don't trust you. And over time something breaks. A man who isn't trusted stops leading, stops initiating, stops trying. Not out of spite, but exhaustion. Respect fuels masculine energy. It creates momentum. It tells him you are capable. Without that oxygen, ambition suffocates. And here's the tragic twist. When respect disappears, attraction often follows. But what happens when a man finally opens up and pays for it? That's where the next fracture begins. Modern culture tells men one thing on repeat: be vulnerable. Open up, share your fears. Let it all out. But dark psychology reveals the risk no one warns them about. Many men learn, once is enough, that vulnerability can be weaponized. If fear shared in trust becomes ammunition in conflict. A doubt admitted in weakness resurfaces during arguments. What about when you said you weren't strong enough? So men adapt, they filter, they calculate every word, not because they're dishonest, but because they've been burned. Here's the silent burden. When a man opens up and his partner collapses emotionally, he has to carry her fear too. Now he's managing his own uncertainty and stabilizing hers. That's not intimacy. That's overload. So he chooses silence, not to deceive, but to protect the relationship's stability. Men don't hide pain because they don't feel it. They hide it because they refuse to let it become chaos. But when vulnerability costs respect, something else must replace it: action. And that's where male love truly reveals itself. Men rarely say I love you the way movies script it. They demonstrate it. Male love is expressed through responsibility, provision, protection, consistency, fixing what's broken, carrying weight silently, choosing duty over desire again and again. This is quiet heroism, and it's often invisible. When it goes unnoticed, a man doesn't complain. He absorbs the disappointment. Because appreciation isn't about praise. It's about recognition. A simple acknowledgement tells him what I do matters, and that fuels everything. Without it, effort turns mechanical. Love becomes obligation, and passion slowly drains away. Men don't need applause. They need to know their sacrifices are seen. When contribution is valued, a man becomes unstoppable. When it's ignored, he feels replaceable. And there's one final misunderstanding that determines whether a man stays engaged or emotionally disappears: the right to silence. Here's the truth that ties everything together, and most people miss it. A man's silence is not abandonment. It's restoration. Men recalibrate in solitude, process pressure, rebuild clarity, reconnect with purpose. When silence is treated like a threat, it becomes one. When it's respected, it becomes a bridge. A man who is allowed space doesn't drift away. He comes back stronger, more present, more loving. Real harmony begins when men stop being treated as unfinished projects. When their nature isn't corrected but understood. Men don't need to be softened into something else. They need trust, respect, recognition, and women don't need to change who they are either. They need to see that male behavior is often love, spoken in a different language. When both sides stop forcing translations and start listening literally, relationships transform. Not louder, not more emotional, but deeper. Now I want to hear from you. Where do you feel misunderstood?